All right, 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock on Tuesday. It's time for English literature. We're going to continue our study of book one of Homer's Iliad. So let's get settled in here and get started. Again, I've said this multiple times, but we're going to start off very slow because there's a lot to learn about the characters and the events and the work itself. And as time goes on, we're going to move more and more quickly through these readings. I think you'll start to feel that today a little bit. But we've taken 4 classes now to get through really just the first couple of pages in Homer's Iliad. And again, the reason is because, there's a saying that the beginning is half of the whole. There's so much information in the first pages of the Iliad that has to be understood in order to know the story and know what's going on and be able to read the rest of the book. And we've got to take our time and talk through that first information, or we'll just never get going. It'll take forever. So we've done that. We've gone through the first few pages. We've talked about the different characters that we've met. We've talked about the different events. We've talked about the gods and the goddesses. We've talked about the theme of the story, and so on. And now we're going to find that week by week, as we have our live classes, we're going to move more and more quickly through the reading, and be able to enjoy the story and pay attention to the story rather than researching to try to figure out all the details. So if I were to ask you, just to get started here, just a quick little quiz, what is the theme? What's the theme of Homer's Iliad? What would you say? Think about it for a minute. What would you say is the theme of the Iliad? Very good. Okay, it's the wrath of Achilles, and we saw that introduced right in the beginning of the poem, right in the opening lines. We saw Homer praying to the muse, asking for the muse to help him to understand what was the cause of the wrath of Achilles and how that wrath was related to the suffering of the Greek armies. So very good. Okay, that's the theme of this story. And in the last class, we looked at Achilles, sort of boiling over in anger and thinking about killing Agamemnon. Who can tell me why Achilles was thinking about killing Agamemnon? What was it that made Achilles angry with Agamemnon? Just to review what we've covered so far. Just answer briefly. I can tell by your answer if you understand or not. What caused Achilles to be angry with Agamemnon? What was it? Think about what we talked about. Think about the story. Yeah, you're getting there. Okay, yeah, you're putting all these little pieces together, right? You've got all these little parts of the story. Because Agamemnon was arrogant, because of the plague, because Agamemnon would give the priest's daughter back, but he said he wanted the Greeks to get very good. Okay, so you're getting the idea, right? What ultimately caused Achilles to be angry with Agamemnon is a king. He's got everything. He's wealthy, he's powerful. They're about to sack this whole city of Troy, and Agamemnon's going to be able to take whatever he wants. He's got everything. And these soldiers, the rewards that they get as a result of their victories, where they're risking their lives to fight these battles, their reward is whatever the plunder is from the people that they conquer. So if they kill a soldier, they get to take his armor. They can take money out of his pocket. They can take his shield. They can take his knife and his sword and so on. So when soldiers are fighting in the ancient world, what they get as a result of their fighting is their reward. And that's really what motivates most of them to fight. It's a way for them to gain riches by their own courage and bravery and strength in battle. And they can do that as long as their cause is just. Okay, so that's how soldiers live in the ancient world. That's what they fight for. They fight for their rewards, and their rewards are like their honors. The things that they gain are their honor. So the kings don't necessarily fight. Agamemnon isn't necessarily on the front line fighting against these enemies. And so the kings often enjoy success when their soldiers win battles, and then the kings enjoy first access to the plunder because they're the king. And so the kings always get the best of everything. And this is Achilles' argument. You're going to get the best of the city of Troy. You're asked to give up this woman that is the cause of this plague, and you're not going to give her up. You're going to make your soldiers pay for her. That's ridiculous. And so Achilles gets angry with that to begin with. That's the first problem. But then it gets even worse because Agamemnon actually says, I'm going to take your woman as my pride to replace this one. So that makes Achilles just blow up, because Achilles knows he's the greatest warrior. He's largely responsible for the Greek success in their battle. And here he's going to be disrespected publicly by Agamemnon. And he's just not going to take that. He's so angry that he's actually thinking about killing Agamemnon. And what happens in the story that causes Achilles to think twice about attacking Agamemnon? What happened in the story that made Achilles check himself and think twice? A god comes down. Very good. A goddess comes down. Who was that goddess? Anyone remember who the goddess was? It was a goddess. Who was it? Minerva. Very good. Okay. She's also known as Athena. Okay. Minerva is the Roman name. Athena was the Greek name for that goddess, the goddess of wisdom. And she comes down to talk to Achilles. And what does she tell Achilles? What is her message to Achilles? How does she calm him down? What does she tell him? Think about it. Give me a good answer. What does Minerva tell Achilles that makes him calm down and get control of himself? She tells him a couple things. What are some of those things? Give me some ideas. What does she tell him? I'll give you a minute. Nothing yet. What does Minerva tell Achilles that calms him down? I'll say she tells him two things. Yeah, good. Okay, that's one of them. James Bates and Damien, that's good. Ezekiel and Jezreel, that's good. Yeah, not let his anger blind him. That's good. Okay, so a couple different things she says, right? Let's summarize it real quick. First of all, good, Xavier. You're on the right path. Okay, so she tells him, first of all, he has already been promised glory in the future. Achilles has already been promised glory. He's going to have his day where he's honored. And she reminds him of that. Okay. And you guys got that. That's good. She also tells him that he can't let his anger run wild. He's got to rule over his anger by what? He's got to subject his anger to what? What should rule over his anger? He can't just let his anger run wild. No, reason, that's it. Very good. Reason is the answer. She tells him that he's got to govern his anger by reason. So we have an important moral lesson here in the poem. I'm going to share my screen now because we're going to get into the text here. So let me share my screen. And I've got on my screen where we left off last week. These are her last words to Achilles. These are her last words, these two lines. Let revenge no longer bear the sway. Let revenge not rule over you. Command your passions and the gods obey. So she tells him to get control of himself, not allow his passions to run wild, but to rule over them with reason and subject them to what's right. Not to allow revenge to take over his soul, but to be reasonable, to know that he will be honored in the future, and to put away this anger, to put a limit on it. So we learned about the passions. We learned what our passions are, that our passions are natural. For example, if whatever your favorite food is, if you are given the opportunity, you might eat yourself until you explode, right? If you were given freedom. You say, oh man, ice cream's so delicious. I could eat a whole box of ice cream until I'm sick. I could drink, there's a fruit drink that my kids like. It's called Tampico. It's like this orange sugary drink. It's just junk food, but We usually let them have some at birthday parties and things like that. They would drink that stuff until their heads blew up. They can't control themselves. And so those are our passions. That's what passions are. We love things that taste good, feel good, and so on. That's just natural in us. God put those passions in us when he created us, but he also put reason in us, and reason is supposed to control those things and keep them under control. So you can enjoy, some ice cream. You can enjoy a bowl of strawberries. You can enjoy some sugary drink once in a while on a special occasion, but it's got to be governed by reason. And you're not just allowed to follow your passions. We're supposed to be governed by reason. So that's what the goddess tells Achilles. So it's a good moral lesson, all right? So we saw all of that story. Agamemnon makes Achilles angry. Achilles is ready to just kill Agamemnon. Minerva comes down to speak to Achilles and says, subject your anger to reason and do what's right, because you're going to get honor in the end. So chill out, Achilles, is what she says. So now we're going to pick up the story where Achilles responds now. So what happens after this goddess visits? And like I said, we're going to start reading through this a little more quickly, and I'll read it all for you and comment once in a while, but the reading is going to get quicker and quicker as we go along here, because I know, especially now, from your answers, I know that you understand what's going on. So let's get going here. So it says, to her Pylades, in other words, Pylades, the son of Peleus, Achilles, responds to her and says, with regardful ear, 'tis just, O goddess, I thy dictates hear. So I hear you, goddess. Hard as it is, my vengeance I suppress. So he gets control of himself. Those who revere the gods will bless. He trusts that he'll be rewarded if he controls himself and acts rightly. Those who revere the gods will bless. He said this, observant of the blue-eyed maid, and then in the sheath returned his shining blade, puts his sword back in its sheath. The goddess, swift to high Olympus flies, and joins the sacred senate of the skies. So Minerva goes back to Mount Olympus. Nor yet the rage his boiling breast forsook, which thus redoubling on Atrides broke. O monster, mixed of insolence and fear. Insolence means pride, and fear. He's talking to Agamemnon again, calls him a monster. He says, thou dog in forehead, but in heart a deer. So he says, you act like you're a dog, you act like you're a tough guy with all this big talk, but really in your heart, you're like a deer. So you like to bark, but you're actually a coward. When it's time for battle, all of your barking stops and you run away. So Achilles is criticizing Agamemnon here. When wert thou known in ambushed fights to dare, or nobly face the horrid front of war? When have you ever fought, Agamemnon? It is ours, the chance of fighting fields to try, thine to look on and bid the valiant die. You're just a spectator while we fight. So much 'tis safer through the camp to go and rob a subject than despoil a foe. So if you want rewards, Agamemnon, why don't you get a sword and come fight with us? And you can win some rewards. No, you'd rather rob one of your subjects. You'd rather wait till the battle's over and then take from one of your subjects, because you're a coward, Achilles says. Scourge of thy people, violent and base, sent in Jove's anger on a slavish race, who, lost to sense of generous freedom past, are tamed to wrongs, or this had been thy last. So he says the reason why Agamemnon is allowed to get away with this is because the Greek people have learned to live like slaves. They've forgotten what it's like to be free, and they allow him to get away with this. And if they didn't, if they remembered that they were once free, they would never allow him to treat them the way that he does. This people who are lost to sense of generous freedom past have been tamed to accept wrongs, or this wrong would have been your last. In other words, the people would have killed you. Now by this sacred scepter hear me swear, which never more shall leaves or blossoms bear, which severed from the trunk as I from thee, on the bare mountains left its parent tree. This scepter, formed by tempered steel to prove, an ensign of the delegates of Jove, from whom the power of laws and justice springs, tremendous oath, inviolate to kings, by this I swear, when bleeding Greece again shall call Achilles, she shall call in vain. When flushed with slaughter, Hector's the greatest soldier in the Trojan army. When flushed with slaughter, Hector comes to spread the purpled shore, that means covered with blood, with mountains of the dead. Then shalt thou mourn the affront or the offense thy madness gave, forced to deplore when impotent to save. Then rage in bitterness of soul to know this act has made the bravest Greek, that is Achilles, thy foe. So Achilles gives this message to Agamemnon and says, you know what, I'm out of here. I'm not going to let you treat me like this. I'm not like these other Greeks who are going to let you get away with this arrogant treatment when you yourself don't fight. I'm packing up my stuff and going home. And you're going to find yourself in trouble when Hector, the great, soldier, the champion of the Trojans, is just butchering all your soldiers, and you've got piles of the dead. And when you look for me to come and save you, I'm not going to be there because I'm leaving. So Achilles tells Agamemnon he's packing up and going home. He's not going to fight anymore for Agamemnon. Achilles spoke, and furious hurled against the ground his scepter, starred with golden studs around, and then he sternly silent sat. With like disdain, the raging king returned his frowns again. So now Agamemnon's going to reply. To calm their passion, as they start to get into this argument and things get really nasty, to calm their passion with the words of age. So an old man is going to speak, and we've talked about what it means to be old in ancient literature, right? It means to have experience. To calm their passion with the words of age, slow from his seat arose the Pylian Sage. What Pylian Sage means is a sage is a wise man. He's an old wise man. Pylian means he's from an island or a city called Pylos, and we'll read more about that later. Okay. So this old man from Pylos, whose name is Nestor, you see his name here in the next line, he stands up, he sort of interrupts Agamemnon and Achilles to calm them down and talk to them as an older, experienced man. To calm their passion with the words of age, slow from his seat arose the Pylian sage. Experienced Nestor, in persuasion skilled. He was a skilled public speaker. He was a rhetorician. In persuasion skilled, his words sweet as honey from his lips distilled. 2 generations now had passed away, wise by his rules and happy by his sway. In other words, he was such an old man that 2 whole generations died that he led and taught, who benefited from his wisdom. So he's a very old man. 2 ages over his native realm he reigned, and now the example of the 3rd generation remained. All viewed with awe this venerable man, who thus with mild benevolence, benevolence means goodwill or kindness, who with mild benevolence began. So we meet this man Nestor, and this man Nestor is important for you to learn about. He's an example of an old, wise, persuasive, benevolent, kind old man. Okay, sort of like the perfect old man in ancient Greek philosophy and history. So we meet this man Nestor, and he's going to speak now to Agamemnon and Achilles to try to calm them down. Now remember, as we read these speeches, right, we don't have any record of what any of these people actually said. So you've got to remember, when you read literature, Homer is telling us this story. Homer is telling us these speeches. He may be writing these speeches himself. Homer may actually be the great rhetorician. He's the one putting these words in their mouths. So we don't know if these are things being revealed by the spirit, the muse, to Homer, or if Homer is actually himself writing these speeches. But it's an opportunity for Homer, if it is Homer, it's an opportunity for him to sort of show off his own skill and write these amazing speeches that these different wise men say. So this is an example where we see Homer's expertise in writing rhetorical speeches. Okay, so these are the words of Nestor to Agamemnon and Achilles. He says, "What shame, what woe is this to Greece? What joy to Troy's proud monarch and the friends of Troy." So look at this fight between these two great Greeks. What a sad day it is for us Greeks. What a happy day it is for the Trojans, who've got the Greek armies dividing among themselves. What a shame it is to Greece, what joy it is to Troy. That adverse gods commit to stern debate the best and bravest of the Grecian state. Young as ye are, this youthful heat restrain. So old Nestor says, it's natural for young men to get all riled up and angry, and he refers to this as youthful heat. So this is another example of a lesson in moral philosophy that we come across in Homer's Iliad. So again, the question, what do we learn about moral philosophy in the Iliad? Here's another lesson. We learn that old men, because of their experience, they're calmer, they're milder, they're wiser, they're kinder, and so on, because they have experience, they've been through all these things, and they don't get all excited when there's a problem. Young men, on the other hand, they have what he calls youthful heat. They're very passionate, easily angry, easily prone to fight and things like that. And that's one of the differences between youth and old age. Old men are wiser, more mild and calm. Young men are like fireballs, ready to blow up all the time. So the reason why that's important morally is it a good thing? Yes or no? Is it a good thing to have a young king? What do you think based on that teaching? Is it a good thing to have a young king? No, right? Because a young king can get you into all kinds of trouble. An old king can keep you out of trouble by staying calm and being mild, okay? So having a young king is dangerous. And if we look through world history, we find lots of examples of young kings who were exactly like that. They were easily angered and they went crazy. Well, King David, good question. What about King David? Well, David was special. I mean, that's the whole point, right? David's wisdom and his self-control and his religion, he was special. He was different. He wasn't like other young men. That's the whole point of the life of King David, how special he was. All right. So he's a good example of an extraordinary young king. In America, we might have talked about this before, but in America, you're not even allowed to run for president until you're how old? How old do you need to be to run for president in America? Anybody know? How old do you need to be before you can even run for president? 35, good. You need to be 35 years old. So, the goal of a rule like that is to try to keep young, hot-blooded guys from getting into influential offices where they can cause all kinds of trouble. All right. So that's another lesson from moral philosophy in the Iliad, okay? He says, young as you are, this youthful heat restrain. Get control of yourself, you crazy young fireballs, right? Calm down. Do not think your Nestor's years and wisdom vain. A godlike race of heroes once I knew, such as no more these aged eyes shall view. Lives there a chief to match Pirithous' fame, Dryas the bold, or Ceneus's deathless name, Theseus endued with more than mortal might, or Polyphemus like the gods in fight. With these of old to toils of battle bred, in early youth my hardy days I led. So what Nestor talks about here, this is a passage that you won't be able to understand on your own. What Nestor talks about here is when he was young, he was already a ruler when he was young, but the men that he ruled over in those days were heroic men. So he's saying back in the old days, it's one of these glory days stories, back when I was a kid, men were different. Men weren't like you guys, bunch of, quarreling punks fighting with each other. Back when I was a kid, the men were heroic. They were men like, and he gives us this name, Pirithous, Dryas, Ceneus, Theseus, Polyphemus. He talks about these heroic men from 2 or 3 generations ago, back when men were men. People always talk like that, right? We talk about how, oh, back in the 1920s, that was the greatest generation. That was when real men were alive. When I was a kid, I would play sports and my grandfather would say, oh, back when I was a kid, they were real baseball players back then, not like nowadays. That's sort of always a theme. And sometimes it's true. Sometimes it's true. Sometimes we see things today that weren't around 50 years ago, and it was a lot better back then than it is now. That's what Nestor talks about here. He's saying, when I was a kid, we didn't have stuff like this. We didn't have silly Greek young men fighting with each other and dividing their own army. We had real heroes who destroyed our enemies in battle. He says, with these of old to toils of battle bred, in early youth my hardy days I led. Yeah, all grandfathers say that. So it's a common theme, but sometimes it's true. Sometimes it's true that 2 generations ago, there were differences. I mean, just think about it. I'm 48 years old. My generation, we didn't have any wars or anything like that. So we were raised softer than other generations who would have been raised in time of war and things like that. I can admit that. I can admit that my generation is probably softer than a generation that lived during wartime. So it's probably true that their generation was better. I have no problem with that. He says, in the early youth, my hardy days, I led men like that, fired with the thirst which virtuous envy breeds, and smitten with love of honorable deeds. That's what motivated those men. They wanted glory. They wanted honor. The strongest of men, they pierced the mountain boar, ranged the wild deserts red with monsters' gore, and from their hills the shaggy centaurs tore. Yet these with soft persuasive arts I swayed. When Nestor spoke, they listened and obeyed. So he talks about the great deeds that these older warriors did, and these great battles they fought against monsters and all these terrible enemies. And he said, even though they were terrible warriors, even though they were powerful, killers in battle who would do anything to gain honor and glory, yet when I spoke to them, they would listen because they were wise men. And so he's saying this to say to Agamemnon and Achilles, you are not as great as those men were, and they used to listen to me. Therefore, you should listen to me. And this is actually a figure of speech. It's an example, I should say, a type of argument. It's proving something that should be true because it was true in a greater situation. So if I can argue that greater men than you listen to me, therefore you, who are lesser than they, you should listen to me. Okay, that's the argument he's making. Greater men listened to me in the past, therefore you should listen to me. So Nestor gets their attention by telling them that these great heroes of the past listened to him. If in my youth even these men esteemed me wise, Do you, young warriors, hear my age advise? Atrides, Achilles, I'm sorry, no, Atrides is Agamemnon. Agamemnon, seize not on the beauteous slave. Don't take the girl, he tells Agamemnon. That prize the Greeks by common suffrage gave. So Nestor tells Agamemnon not to take Achilles' girl from him. Nor thou, Achilles, treat our prince with pride. Let kings be just and sovereign power preside. So he gives Agamemnon and Achilles advice. He says, Agamemnon, don't do it. Don't provoke Achilles to anger. And he tells Achilles, Achilles, don't do it. Don't spite yourself and leave the battle, but humble yourself before your king and think of your people. So don't do it. Okay. Don't worry about it. As long as your microphone is off, I don't care if there's busyness in the background. Nobody really cares about that. All right. Okay, so he goes on. Let kings be just and sovereign power preside. Submit to the government, Achilles. Don't be stupid. Thee, Achilles, the first honors of war adorn, like gods in strength and of a goddess born. So you're great, Achilles. Be great. Him, Agamemnon, awful majesty exalts above the powers of earth and sceptered sons of Jove. He's also great. You're both great. You have to learn how to get along for the sake of your people. Let both unite with well-consenting mind. So shall authority with strength be joined. Leave me, O king, to calm Achilles' rage. Rule thou thyself as you are more advanced in age. Forbid it, gods, that Achilles should be lost, the pride of Greece and bulwark of our host, strength of our army. So what Nestor tries to do here is he tries to make peace between Agamemnon and Achilles. Now, the reason why that speech is important for you as you're studying is you have here an example to teach you wisdom about how to make peace between people, okay? We have an example here of how to be a peacemaker. You know, Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers. What we have here in Nestor's speech, we have an example of what it means to be a peacemaker and how to be a peacemaker, right? So what does Nestor do? Think about this speech. He steps up to talk. First of all, he's older than the people fighting. So that's the first thing. In order to be a peacemaker, the person who seeks to make peace has to actually be able to make peace. If some other young guy stood up, the king would likely ignore him. But if an old wise man steps up to make peace, both people will listen. And so we see that old men, old, experienced, respectable men, they're the men who really should be the ones leading efforts to make peace. It should be older, respected men. They should be the ones who try to make peace between people, or at least someone who both groups respect, right? That's the kind of person who can make peace. So that's one lesson we learn about persuasive speech, is that you've got to be the right kind of person to be able to make peace between enemies, okay? So that's the first thing. Secondly, we see what he does. He talks to both of the men, and he talks about the strengths and the importance of both of the men. He talks about why we should respect the king. He talks about why we should respect Achilles. And he tells the king not to disrespect Achilles, and he tells Achilles not to disrespect the king. He encourages them to think about the benefit of everyone else. Don't be selfish and allow yourself to divide over a private quarrel. Think about the whole army. Think about everybody else. So he uses this concern for the common good as an argument to try to get them to get along with each other just enough so that they can fight together and continue to move forward. So we see an example of how to make peace. So if you have, let's say, two friends that are fighting, what's better, for all of you to get along and enjoy each other's friendship, or to fight and separate over your own individual problems. It's better for everybody to get along. So when you've got two people fighting, it's good to talk to them about the strengths of both of their character and to explain why it's a bad idea for them to be willing to lose friendship with that other person, but why it's better for everyone to stay together. So we see here, remember, Nestor's a persuasive speaker. We see here how to make peace, how to be a peacemaker. So don't just look at Nestor's words, read them and move on. Realize Homer has just taught us how to go about making peace when people are fighting. So it's another good moral lesson, how to be a peacemaker, okay? We've got that speech from Nestor. Let's keep moving here. This said, Nestor ceased, stopped his speech, and the king of men, Agamemnon, replies. Agamemnon says to Nestor, thy years are awful. And what awful here means is not bad, right? He's not saying, oh, you're so old, that's terrible, gross. That's not what he means when he says thy years are awful. What he means is your years are worthy of respect. Okay, they're amazing. Your old age is great, and I respect your old age. It's awful. It fills me with awe. I can't imagine having the experience and wisdom that you have. Your years are awful, and your words are wise. But that imperious, that unconquered soul, no laws can limit, no respect control. So he says, I respect your words, Nestor, but Achilles is crazy. He says, his spirit has no control. He's a wild animal. No laws can limit, no respect controls that man. He's crazy. Before his pride, his superiors must fall. His word is the law. He is the Lord of all. That's what he imagines. Him must our hosts, our armies, our chiefs, even ourself, the king, obey. What king can bear a rival in his sway? Grant that the gods his matchless force have given. I admit he's strong, he's a great warrior. But has foul reproach a privilege from heaven? So Agamemnon says, yeah, I agree. He's important, but he's just nuts. There's no way to govern him. He's just a wild animal, and I would rather if he left. It's not worth having him with us. Hereon the monarch's speech Achilles broke. So Achilles responds, and furious, thus, and interrupting spoke. Achilles says, tyrant, I well deserved thy galling chain, to live thy slave, and still to serve in vain. Should I submit to each unjust decree, command thy vassals, but command not me. Seize on Briseis, that's his girl, Briseis is her name. He says, go ahead, take her, seize on Briseis, whom the Grecians doomed, my prize of war, yet tamely she resumed, and seize secure. No more Achilles draws his conquering sword in any woman's cause. So Achilles says, I'm not going to fight you over Briseis, this girl, but I'm also not going to fight for you against Helen. He says, no more Achilles draws his conquering sword in any woman's cause, so including your war against Troy. The gods command me to forgive the past, but let this first invasion be my last. So I will forgive and I will move on, but I'm done. For know thy blood, when next thou darest invade, shall stream in vengeance on my reeking blade. So they don't make peace. Agamemnon says, there's no way I can have him around. He's impossible to govern. And Achilles said, there's no way I'm fighting for you anymore. I'm out of here. At this they ceased. The stern debate expired. The chiefs in sullen majesty retired. Achilles with Patroclus, his friend. Achilles with Patroclus took his way, where near his tents, his hollow vessels, his ships lay. Meantime, Atrides, Agamemnon, launched with numerous oars a well-rigged ship for Chrysa's sacred shores. So Agamemnon heads back to return the girl to the priest of Apollo. High on the deck of his ship was fair Chryseis placed, and sage Ulysses, wise Ulysses. Remember that name Ulysses because that's the Roman name. In Greek, that's Odysseus. So when we read the Odyssey, we're going to read the story of Odysseus. That Ulysses is the same person. That's Odysseus. Sage or wise Ulysses was with Agamemnon, with the conduct graced. Safe in her sides, the hecatomb, the sacrifice, they stowed, then swiftly sailing, cut through the liquid road. There's a good example of a figure of speech. He refers to the sea, to the path that the ship sails. He refers to it as a liquid road, okay? Yeah, almost time to go. Good. All right, so we're making our way through. So what we should do here is we'll stop here. We've reached a good place to stop. Let me just give you a quick summary to wrap things up. So in the last class, we talked about when Minerva comes to talk to Achilles to try to calm him down because he was ready to kill Agamemnon. Achilles agrees to calm down and he doesn't threaten Agamemnon anymore. But they still continue to fight and they're right back at it. As soon as Minerva leaves, they're back at it, arguing with each other, and they're not going to be reconciled. So the old man, Nestor, stands up and he speaks to them, tries to make peace, and we have a good example of what it means to be a peacemaker. But even after he speaks, Agamemnon and Achilles say, no way. There's no way that we can be reconciled. We're not going to get back together. Agamemnon says, I'm content for him to leave. I don't care what he says. Achilles says, there's no way I'm fighting for Agamemnon. So they split up. And at the end of our reading today, what we finished in this class, we have this split is confirmed between Agamemnon and Achilles. So there's no way for them to be reconciled. They're going to split. And we end with Agamemnon taking the girl, putting her on the ship, and sailing off to bring her to the priest of Apollo to put an end to this plague. Okay, so that's where we end in this class. We're starting to get through a little more quickly. I'm going to try to comment only where I think there's something that you might not understand, and we'll just read through this week by week. I'll read through it with you and help you to get through it. As we're going through, go back and look at the assignments, complete these assignments, and we'll just keep going through these books together all the way through the literature program. So that's all for today. If you've got any questions, I'll hang around to answer any of them. Otherwise, you're free to go. I'll catch you next week, okay? Thank you, guys.